I'm posting this from a throwaway because, honestly, some doors don't need reopening with my real name attached. Call me William. I'm not proud of what I did, but it's been rattling around in my head for years, and this feels like the right place to unload it. This is about illegal betting, not the glamorous movie kind, not high-roller casinos or smoke-filled back rooms. It was smaller, uglier, and way more personal. It started as a side thing, something I told myself was just numbers and probability, and it ended up costing me sleep, friendships, and a version of myself I didn't even realize I was slowly killing off. At the time, I was broke in that very specific way where you're technically surviving but constantly one surprise expense away from panic. Rent was late more often than I admitted. I had student loans, a job that paid just enough to keep me hopeful, and a brain that wouldn't shut up about shortcuts. I'd always been good with stats, patterns, odds, or at least I thought I was. That confidence is important. It's how I justified everything that came next. The opportunity came through a friend of a friend situation, the kind you barely register as dangerous because it's wrapped in familiarity. People already do this, I told myself. The system is the problem, not me. I wasn't trying to be a criminal. I was trying to feel in control. I didn't see it as illegal betting at first. I saw it as hustle. As leverage. As a temporary solution that would magically stay temporary. That's the lie this story is built on. Once the idea took root, I didn't jump in right away. That's something I remember clearly. I told myself I was being responsible, that if I planned carefully enough, I could avoid the messy parts. In reality, I was just easing myself into a line I already knew I'd cross. I started by watching. Listening. I paid attention to how people talked about games, spreads, inside tips. Who bragged, who stayed quiet, who always seemed calm even when they lost. I built mental profiles instead of spreadsheets, because spreadsheets would have made it feel too real. Too official. I kept everything in my head so I could pretend it was harmless. I set rules for myself, which is almost funny in hindsight. Limits. Boundaries. Promises about when I'd stop. I convinced myself I wasn't exploiting anyone, just facilitating something they already wanted. That framing mattered to me. It let me sleep at night, at least at first. Every small decision felt calculated, but underneath it all was this nervous hum. A sense that once I took the next step, there was no clean way back. The moment it stopped being theoretical was the moment money changed hands. Not a lot at first, a few hundred here, a few casual bets there. Enough to feel real but not enough to scare anyone. Including me. That was the danger. It felt manageable. I didn't advertise. I let it spread naturally, like a rumor. One guy tells another guy, who asks me if I can hold action for the weekend. I shrugged like it was no big deal, like I wasn't internally rehearsing every word. I used neutral language, avoided anything that sounded official. No paper trail, no texts with obvious wording. Everything was coded casual, forgettable, or so I thought. I kept a notebook hidden in an old backpack, tracking bets in shorthand only I could understand. I told myself it was temporary, just until I caught up financially. That's when the first win hit. Clean. Easy. Enough to cover rent and groceries. I remember staring at that cash and feeling a rush that scared me more than losing ever had. It felt like proof that I was smarter than the system. That I deserved this. After that first real win, the whole thing slid into my life like it had always been there. I'd wake up, check lines, go to work, pretend to care about meetings, then mentally calculate spreads while nodding at my boss. By the time Sunday rolled around, my phone buzzed nonstop. People trusted me now. That part came fast. I told myself routine meant safety. Familiarity meant control. I had systems, who paid up front, who could float until Monday, who needed reminders framed as jokes. I learned how to sound relaxed while doing math at lightning speed. I learned how to smile while internally tracking 6 games at once. The money started stacking in uneven ways. Some weeks I was up more than I made at my actual job. Other weeks I barely broke even, but even then, the action kept me hooked. I wasn't chasing losses yet, I was chasing momentum. What I didn't admit was how tense I'd become. I slept lightly. I flinched at notifications. I'd replay conversations, wondering if I sounded suspicious. The thrill was still there, but it had teeth now. The first real problem didn't come from law enforcement, or some dramatic bust. It came from a friend who lost more than he could afford and didn't laugh it off. He stopped texting jokes. His messages got shorter, sharper. "You sure that line was right?" That game felt weird. I told him variance happens. I told him what everyone in gambling tells themselves. Inside, I felt something twist. That's when I realized I'd stopped seeing people as friends and started seeing them as exposure. Risk. I'd mentally tally how much each person owed or was owed whenever they walked into a room. Conversations felt transactional even when they weren't supposed to be. I hated that about myself, but not enough to stop. I adjusted things quietly. Changed how much I'd let certain people bet. Nudged others towards safer plays. I told myself I was protecting them, when really I was protecting me. The guilt didn't hit all at once. It leaked in slowly, like water through a crack, impossible to ignore once you noticed it. And still, I kept going. That's the part that's hardest to admit. By the time I noticed how far in I was, the goal had quietly changed. It wasn't about making extra money anymore. It was about keeping everything balanced. Making sure no one won too big. Making sure no one lost so badly they'd blow everything up. I told myself a good bookie keeps the ecosystem healthy. Looking back, that's a pretty gross way to describe people you care about. I started hedging bets through other channels, placing money in places I swore I'd never touch. Different apps, different names, different favors called in. Each move added another layer, another thing to remember. I felt clever, then exhausted, then wired all at once. My brain never shut off. There were nights I'd wake up convinced I'd miscalculated something. I'd grab my notebook at 3 a.m., recheck numbers with shaking hands, heart racing like I'd just committed a crime, which, of course, I had. The worst part was the adrenaline. Even when I hated what I was doing, a part of me loved the pressure. Loved feeling essential. That scared me more than any threat of getting caught. Every operation has a breaking point, and mine came on a weekend packed with games I should have avoided. Too many variables. Too many people betting emotionally instead of logically. Rivalries, playoff implications, last-minute injuries, all the things that turn math into chaos. I knew it going in, and I ignored it. By Saturday night, I was already exposed more than I liked. A couple underdogs covered when they weren't supposed to. A last-second field goal flipped a spread and wiped out my cushion. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Some people celebrating, others panicking, a few already asking about rolling winnings into Sunday. I kept responding like everything was fine, like I wasn't sweating through my shirt. Sunday was worse. One guy, a close friend, went all in on a parlay I subtly encouraged him not to take. It hit. Every leg. Clean. When the final whistle blew, I stared at my notebook and felt my stomach drop. I owed more cash than I physically had access to. For the first time, the thought crossed my mind, I can't cover this. And once that thought exists, it never really leaves. I spent that night pacing my apartment like the walls were closing in. I kept running numbers, hoping I'd made a mistake, hoping something would magically cancel out. It didn't. The debt was real, and it had a name and a face attached to it. A friend who trusted me. That made it worse than if it had been a stranger. I told him I needed a day to settle up. He was cool about it at first, which somehow made my chest feel tighter. I started calling in favors I'd been saving. Just in case. Borrowed money under vague pretenses. Sold a couple things I cared about more than I admitted. Each transaction felt like digging deeper instead of climbing out. I also started lying more, small lies, technical truths, delays framed as logistics. Bank issues. Cash limit. Stuff people don't question right away. I hated how natural it felt. Like I'd been training for this moment without realizing it. Sleep was impossible. Every vibration of my phone felt like exposure. Not police, worse. People. Disappointment. Anger. The realization that I'd turned a game into something that could actually ruin lives, including mine. I managed to pay him. Not cleanly, not all at once, but enough to keep the situation from exploding. Handing over that cash felt heavier than any loss I'd ever taken. There was no thrill in it. Just relief mixed with shame. He joked about buying drinks with it, and I laughed, but my stomach stayed tight the rest of the night. That should have been the end. The clear sign to walk away. Instead, I told myself I just needed one more clean stretch to stabilize everything. That's how deep the delusion ran. I didn't quit, I downsized. Fewer people. Smaller limits. I framed it as being responsible, even though I was already past that point. What really started to hurt was the social fallout. Friends stopped inviting me to things. Conversations went quiet when I walked in. No one accused me of anything directly, but I could feel the shift. Trust doesn't shatter loudly, it erodes. I started drinking more, telling myself it helped me sleep. It didn't. It just made the guilt louder in the morning. I'd look in the mirror and barely recognize the guy staring back, someone always calculating, always bracing for impact. By this point, my life felt like it was running on a constant delay. Everything normal happened a few seconds behind the panic in my head. I'd be at dinner, nodding along to a conversation, while mentally replaying bets from weeks ago, wondering if I'd missed something that could still come back to haunt me. I started avoiding people connected to the betting, which was tricky because that overlap was bigger than I wanted to admit. I'd take longer routes home to avoid running into anyone. If someone texted, "Hey," my first thought wasn't friend, it was problem. That alone should tell you how warped my perspective had become. I also got paranoid in dumb ways. Strange cars parked on my street. Unknown numbers calling my phone. Every knock at the door made my pulse spike. Rationally, I knew the odds of getting busted were low, but paranoia doesn't care about logic. It feeds on guilt. What surprised me most was how lonely it got. I was surrounded by people but couldn't be honest with any of them. I'd built this whole secret structure, and now I was trapped inside it, listening to it creak and hoping it wouldn't collapse. The closest I ever came to getting caught didn't look dramatic from the outside. No sirens. No cuffs. Just a conversation that went on about 30 seconds too long. I was at a bar with coworkers, trying to feel normal, when someone mentioned a betting ring that had been shut down nearby. Everyone laughed, shook their heads, moved on. I didn't. One guy, drunk, curious, harmless, asked me if I'd ever thought about running something like that. Said I. Seemed like the type who knows odds. My heart slammed so hard I thought it showed on my face. I made a joke, brushed it off, but I could feel heat crawling up my neck. For the rest of the night, I barely spoke. After that I panicked. I burned the notebook. Literally. Tore out the pages, fed them into my kitchen sink, watched months of numbers turn to ash. I deleted contacts, old messages, anything that hinted at what I'd been doing. It felt dramatic, but also necessary, like cutting off a limb to save the body. The problem was, destroying the evidence didn't destroy the memories. Or the habits. Or the person I'd become. Even as I tried to disappear, the anxiety stayed, humming under everything. It was the first time I truly understood that getting away with something doesn't mean you're free. I didn't quit in one brave, decisive moment. I let it die slowly, which feels fitting. I stopped answering certain messages. Told people I was out of action. Blamed work, stress, life. Some pushed back, some didn't. A few seemed relieved. That hurt more than I expected. The money tapered off, and with it, the constant buzz in my head. Not gone, just quieter. I started sleeping in longer stretches, though the dreams were still restless. I'd wake up convinced I owed someone something, only to realize it was just my brain refusing to let go. The hardest part was facing the silence. No constant calculations, no adrenaline spikes, no sense of being needed. I'd built part of my identity around managing chaos, and without it, I felt strangely empty. That scared me. It made me understand why people relapse into worse situations than mine. I tried to repair relationships, but you can't apologize for things you can't fully explain. Some friendships recovered. Others didn't. That's a debt you don't get to refinance. Even after it ended, I still caught myself checking lines out of habit. That's when I knew it had changed me permanently, just not in ways I ever intended. You'd think once it was over, the guilt would fade. It doesn't. It just changes shape. Instead of sharp panic, it becomes this dull, ever-present weight you carry into normal moments. Laughing with friends. Sitting alone on a quiet night. Even doing something good can feel tainted when you remember how easily you justified doing something wrong. I started replaying conversations from that time, hearing them differently now. The jokes. The trust. The casual way people handed me money without a second thought. That's the part that keeps me up some nights, not the illegality, but the responsibility I pretended wasn't mine. I also noticed how much my instincts had warped. I'd catch myself calculating odds in everyday situations, predicting outcomes like life was still a game I could manage from behind the scenes. It made me cynical. Detached. I had to actively unlearn that mindset, remind myself that not everything needs leverage. What scared me most was realizing how close I came to normalizing it forever. If that one weekend hadn't gone wrong, if I hadn't felt that drop in my stomach, I might still be doing it, smiling, justifying, sleeping less every year. That thought alone still makes my chest tighten. Time gave me distance, but it also gave me clarity I didn't ask for. Once the noise died down, I couldn't hide behind urgency anymore. I had to look at what I'd actually done and, worse, why it felt so easy. It wasn't desperation alone. It was ego. I liked feeling sharper than everyone else. Needed. In control. The betting just gave that part of me a stage. I started noticing how that same impulse showed up elsewhere, at work, in arguments, even in friendships. Always trying to manage outcomes. Always positioning myself. Illegal betting didn't create that trait, but it fed it until it became unhealthy. Seeing that was uncomfortable, but necessary. I never got arrested. Never got exposed publicly. From the outside, I got away with it. But internally, something cracked. I lost the kind of innocence about my own morality. I learned that I'm capable of lying calmly, of rationalizing harm, of choosing convenience over integrity if I'm not careful. That knowledge sticks with you. It doesn't ruin your life, but it humbles you in a way success never could. You stop seeing yourself as the exception, and that might be the most important lesson of all. If you're reading this and thinking, that wouldn't be me, that's exactly where I started. I didn't wake up wanting to break the law or hurt anyone. I wanted relief. Control. A win. The slide from just this once to this is my life now is quiet, and that's what makes it dangerous. What I learned is that illegal things rarely feel illegal while you're doing them. They feel justified, necessary, even clever. The cost shows up later, in your sleep, in your relationships, in the way your brain never fully relaxes again. Money comes and goes. That tension sticks. My advice? If you find yourself hiding something that used to feel harmless, stop early. Talk to someone before secrecy becomes routine. And if you're already in deep, know that walking away messy is still better than staying clean-looking and hollow. I don't tell this story to scare people. I tell it because I wish someone had told me. I'm still William. I'm still figuring myself out. But I don't confuse adrenaline for purpose anymore, and that alone feels like a win I didn't have to bet on.